Welcome to Acterra's first lecture for our fall 2020 series, Vegan Nutrition, What Does the Science Say? My name is Robbie Brown. I'm the Community Engagement Associate for Acterra. Just a few Zoom logistics to go over before we begin. The chat box is disabled for this event, as well as your webcam and microphone. However, we will have a Q&A portion after our speaker's presentation. If you would like to submit a question for our speaker, please use the Q&A tab within the Zoom application. All you have to do is click the Q&A tab. You can type in your question, click submit, and we'll go from there. I can't promise that we will get to everyone's question today, but there is a feature where you can upvote questions. So if there's a particular one that you really hope that we get to, please vote that one by clicking the thumbs up icon to the left of the question. So if you're not familiar with Acterra, we are an environmental nonprofit based in the Bay Area. Specifically, we are located within Palo Alto. And we also just celebrated our 50th anniversary this year, which we are really excited about. We're driven by environmental problems that are occurring locally and globally, and primarily the problems that have resulted due to climate change. So we like to engage our local communities, companies, and agencies within the Bay Area, primarily with a focus in Santa Clara and San Mateo counties. We have a wide variety of programming under the categories of electrification, food sustainability, workplace sustainability, and education. Our lecture for today falls under our education programming. So we have our public lecture series, just like this, our Youth Be the Change program, and the climate resilient communities. Actera does not endorse or support the expressed opinions of any of our speakers, but our aim is just merely to present a diverse range of views to help advance these conversations and to allow deeper reflections on challenging issues. First, we'd like to thank our series underwriters for their support, Marion Clinton Gilliland and Armin and Elion Nukermans. Excuse me. And we'd also like to thank our series sponsors, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and the Foster and Palo Alto, as well as our community partner, 350 Silicon Valley Food and Climate Team. Before we start today, I just want to make a couple announcements about upcoming events that we will be hosting. Our first one is on October 18th. This is a free Drive Electric workshop. This workshop will cover the benefits of being an electric car owner and reveal the many EV rebate programs and other financial perks that make EVs cheaper to own than gas-powered cars. On the 21st of October, Actera's executive director will have a virtual coffee hour. This is a great sort of informal event where you can have one-on-one conversations with her and with her guests. On the 29th of October, Actera's Young Professionals is hosting their third event, Exploring the Career World, covering standard approaches in career growth with Curtis Cox, the founder of Curtis Careers. This is a great event if you're interested in professional development. He's going to be covering topics such as self-assessments, workplace etiquette, leadership, and more. And then one that we're very excited about as well is on the 1st of November, and this is Holiday Refresh. So it's going to be an event with local chefs from the Bay Area. They're going to be sharing a world of flavors and recipes to curb climate change. This will be a live cooking demonstration event, and you will also be able to learn tips about reducing waste, eating plant-based foods, and the benefits of induction cooking. So today we have with us Jack Norris. We'd like to introduce Jack Norris, who's a registered dietitian and the executive director of the nonprofit Vegan Outreach. Jack is a co-author of the book Vegan for Life, Everything You Need to Know to Be Healthy on a Plant-Based Diet. He also manages and websites a blog called veganhealth.org. And in 2005, he was elected to the Animal Rights Hall of Fame. So I'm now gonna hand off the spotlight to Jack Norris. And just a reminder, we will have a Q&A portion during this event after his presentation. So please feel free to submit any questions that you may have for Jack in the Q&A tab. Jack, thank you for being here. Please feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Robbie. Okay, I want to thank Robbie and Lauren and everyone at Actera for hosting this talk. I'm very grateful. There's three main points to this talk. The first is that the vegan diet has some definite advantages, but you need to pay attention to some nutrients. That's the second part. You need to pay attention to some nutrients. And the third is that once you get the patterns down, it becomes easy. So here is a summary of the health benefits of a vegan diet. I'll talk in a little bit more detail, in compared to regular meat eaters, vegans have 3/4 to 1/3 lower rates of blood pressure, 1/3 the risk of type 2 diabetes, 15 to 20% lower risk of cancer, and significantly lower levels of cholesterol. The reason we know these things is due to cohort studies. These are studies where a large number of vegetarians and vegans, along with other people following other types of diets, are brought together. They try to pick people with similar lifestyles, and they're followed over time to see what differences there are between the health outcomes in the different groups. So in the beginning of these cohort studies, there were not a whole lot of vegans in the studies. The more recent ones have had large numbers of vegans, as you can see. And it differs quite a bit depending on what what arm of this study they're researching. So these numbers can go up and down in terms of how many vegans are involved. So first I'll cover mortality. This is mortality from the Adventist Health Study. The Adventist Health Study is done in the United States, and the people in the study are Seventh-day Adventists. They promote a vegetarian diet to their members. They tend to be lacto-ovo-vegetarian, but more and more the numbers of vegans are increasing. And because they tend to avoid alcohol and smoking, they are a great group of people to study to figure out what the difference between the diet is versus other lifestyle factors. So after 6 years of follow-up for the Adventist Health Study 2, they found actually, let me see, my thing is in the way and I don't seem to have control of the mouse, which is odd. Huh. Okay, well, the meat that vegans had about the same, in terms of okay, I should point out one thing, that is statistical significance. When looking at the rates of these diseases, if the rate is lower than 1, it means a diet group has a lower risk than the meat eaters. If it's higher than 1, it means they have a higher risk than the meat eaters. But if 1 falls in the parentheses, that means that it's not statistically significant. And because you need a lot of deaths to determine differences in significance, we don't have much difference. We have not found much difference between vegans and meat eaters to date. There was the difference between vegans and meat eaters was about 15% lower death rate for vegans, but it was not quite statistically significant. And you can see that in the 0.85 in the far right column. I don't seem to, for some reason, my mouse isn't working. I don't know if that's disabled or not, but I will move on to the next. There was the basic take-home message right here is that vegans and lacto-vegetarians have about the same rate as regular meat eaters in the Adventist Health Study 2. In 2019, cardiovascular disease incidence was reported from Epic Oxford. In this study, they found that, now I can point. Okay, so this finding was statistically significant. It showed that lacto-vegetarians had a 23% reduced risk of ischemic heart disease. There was a little bit of controversy here because the stroke risk was higher. It wasn't statistically significant higher for vegans. One thing about stroke is that people with low cholesterol levels tend to have a higher rate of what's called hemorrhagic stroke, where you have bleeding in the brain. But that most stroke is due to ischemic stroke, where there's a lack of blood flow in the brain, and people tend to have higher rates of that type of stroke in general. And vegetarians and vegans tend to have lower rates of the more common stroke. But nonetheless, there was a trend towards higher, even though it wasn't statistically significant in the vegans, of total stroke. Overall, heart disease was lower for the vegans when you combine heart attacks and stroke. Cholesterol levels in Epic Oxford. Vegans have a significantly lower amount of levels of cholesterol. They tend to have 171 versus 199 for the average meat eater in these studies. And then these are pesco-vegetarians, are people who eat no meat except for fish, and then lacto-vegetarians. And the trends in these studies are generally that you find lower levels of cholesterol and other heart disease parameters as you go from meat eater to vegan. And we found that here. Blood pressure tends to be lower in vegans. In Epic Oxford, vegans reported, they asked people if they had been diagnosed with high blood pressure. They didn't actually determine it due to the large number of people they were involved in the study. They just asked it on a survey. Vegans had an 8%, vegan women had an 8% rate of high blood pressure, whereas meat-eating women had 12%. For men, it was 15% for meat eaters and 6% for vegans. Adventist Health Study 2 also measured high blood pressure. They did it based on rates, well, they found that vegans had only the 37% rate of having high blood pressure as meat eaters did. After they adjusted for body mass index, which tends to increase as your body mass goes up, it's associated with higher rates of blood pressure. After they adjusted it, vegans had about half the rate of high blood pressure. Cancer incidence for vegans has been about 15 to 20% lower in studies when you add together all the cancers. Because you need a very large number of people and follow them for a very long time, it's hard to determine differences in cancer incidence among various types of cancer for vegans versus meat eaters because there just aren't enough people. But when you combine all cancers together, vegans in this study in Epic Oxford had a 20% reduced rate that was statistically significant. And in Adventist Health Study 2, they had about a 16% reduced risk that was also slightly statistically significant. Because of the consistency between the two studies, it seems like that's probably a fairly solid finding. They adjust for many factors here, as you can see, smoking being an important one. Diabetes has been found to be much lower in vegans. In Epic Oxford, vegans had only half the rate of diabetes as meat eaters. This was after 17.5 years of follow-up. And in Adventist Health Study 2, after only 2 years of follow-up, which isn't very, very much, but vegans had a 62% lower rate of being diagnosed with diabetes. I'm looking forward to future reports after following the vegans for much longer. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the needs, the nutrient concerns of vegan diets. And I have all the recommendations on this page, daily needs on veganhealth.org, so there's no need to write anything down. You can just go to that page and it's all listed there for each nutrient. Vitamin B12 is the big one. It's not found generally in plants. Plants don't need vitamin B12, so they don't create it. It's created by bacteria, and in animal foods, the B12 originates from bacteria. They get it in various ways. Either animals eat it or they have bacteria in their digestive tract that makes it and they absorb it. Humans also have bacteria in our digestive tract that makes vitamin B12, but it's too far down in our digestive tract to be absorbed, unfortunately. It's needed for healthy blood and healthy nerves. If you don't get B12 for a long period of time and become deficient, you become fatigued, and eventually you might have tingling in your fingers and toes, and you need to take care of it if you start to notice symptoms like that. But if you follow the recommendations I'm about to give, you should have no problem. And the recommendations are for cyanocobalamin, that's a form of B12. There are generally two forms on the market that you can buy a supplement for, cyanocobalamin and methylcobalamin. And you want cyanocobalamin. It's been very well studied, and whereas methylcobalamin has not, and there's a little bit of evidence that you need higher amounts of methylcobalamin. So I tell people to stick with cyano until we know more about methyl. We recommend 25 to 100 micrograms per day that can be gotten in a supplement, or 500 micrograms 3 times a week, or 1,000 micrograms twice a week. Those are common amounts that you'll find in a supplement. You can also get vitamin B12 from fortified foods, but it tends to be inconsistent and not in a lot of foods that a lot of vegans typically eat. But if you do happen to eat fortified foods with vitamin B12 in it, you can get it that way, and just make sure that you're meeting the RDA, and that page on Daily Needs that I mentioned has more info on that. There's a lot of rumors about various plant foods having vitamin B12. If a food is contaminated with B12 producing bacteria, which most bacteria don't produce B12, but some do obviously, then food might have some vitamin B12 in it. But you can't rely on it. And so far there's been no food that has been tested from multiple places that has been shown to improve the best measure of vitamin B12 status, which is methylmalonic acid. So until there's a food that does that, you shouldn't rely on anything but straight up supplements or fortified foods, because we know that's real B12 and that the food or supplement will actually have it. Calcium is the next nutrient that's important for vegans to pay attention to. One study from the EPIC Oxford, which is one of the cohort studies I mentioned earlier, has shown that vegans who don't get at least 525 milligrams of calcium per day have higher rates of fractures than vegans that do get more, or that people in other diet groups who are also getting generally about 95% of people in other diet groups get at least 525 milligrams of calcium. But the vegans in EPIC Oxford, only about half were getting that much or more. So it's important for vegans to pay attention to this. So calcium is found in dark leafy green vegetables. You need to consume a decent amount of them to meet your needs through leafy greens. So I often recommend calcium fortified beverages such as non-dairy milks, and orange juice is often fortified with calcium. And tofu is most tofu is made with calcium salts. You'll see the word calcium listed in the ingredients, and that's also very high in calcium. So I recommend aiming for at least 2 servings of these foods, which are the leafy greens or the fortified beverages each day, or the tofu. Or if you don't do any of those things, you can take a 300 milligram calcium supplement. One thing I like to caution vegans is that we know a lot of leafy greens are high in calcium, but you really have to eat them to get the calcium from them. So don't just think, oh, I'm covered because leafy greens have it. You have to make sure that you're getting it. There are some foods that are high in oxalate, some leafy greens that are also high in calcium, but you can't absorb much calcium from leafy greens that are high in oxalate, and spinach would be one of them, and chard is another. So as delicious as they can be, you're not getting much calcium from them. You are getting iron, and they're not going to take away from the calcium in other foods or greens, but you shouldn't rely just on the high oxalate foods. Vitamin D can be a problem for anyone, whether they're vegan or meat eater. Milk in the US is fortified with vitamin D, so you can get small amounts from fortified milk. The recommendations for vitamin D have gone up in recent years, and you're not likely to meet the RDA through just drinking a glass of cow's milk per day that's fortified. So generally for most people, during the summer, if you're getting enough sun during the time of day where you could potentially get sunburned, in other words, you need to wear sunscreen during that part of the day, that's a good measure of whether your body's going to make vitamin D during that time. So if you can't get sunburned, you're not probably making any vitamin D, and so you can't rely on the sun at that time. So for example, in the summer, I might go out for 10 minutes in the sun before putting sunscreen on to get vitamin D. Now, some dermatologists recommend that you get all your vitamin D from supplements rather than the sun to avoid skin cancer. So that's another option. And this is true of anyone, not just vegans. So you can get it through fortified foods and supplements, specially treated mushrooms. You should look on the carton, the mushroom carton, to see if they've been specially treated. You just can't rely on mushrooms. And they treat them by just putting them in the sun, which is interesting. So mushrooms are like humans in that they can make vitamin D from being in the sun. And again, sunshine on your skin. So here's the recommendations for sun if you are wanting to opt for that, and to expose a part of your body for 10 to 15 minutes at a time. Iodine is something not many people think about. Iodine is found in a lot of foods, including produce, but it's inconsistent. It really depends on what soil the food is grown in. And because some research has shown populations of vegans to be on the lower end of iodine, I like to make sure that vegans are getting enough. And especially if you eat a lot of soy, soy can be an iodine inhibitor. And so it's important. If you're getting enough iodine, then soy is no problem, but you want to make sure you're getting enough. And so if you eat iodized salt, salt sold in the grocery store in the United States to put on people's food is iodized. Salt sold for restaurants and food service is not iodized generally, so you can't rely on that salt. But if you do buy table salt and put it on your food, and you're putting about a quarter teaspoon a day on it, that should cover you. Also, if you eat seaweed regularly, say 3 times a week, you're eating a serving of seaweed. Most seaweed also has iodine, so you probably don't need any iodine supplement. But for people who are not doing that, you should get an iodine supplement. You can order them off Amazon or find them in a grocery store, health food store. And we recommend iodine potassium tablets due to the concerns about arsenic being in kelp tablets. And we recommend about half the DRI per day, the dietary reference intake, and half of it for adults is 75 micrograms. Okay. Omega-3s is a fairly controversial topic. There are 2 types of omega-3s. There's short chain, which are found in numerous plant foods, and there are long chain, which tend to be found in fish and seaweed. They are not found in large amounts in seaweed, but they do, you can concentrate the seaweed and make vegan supplements of DHA and EPA out of seaweed. So vegans can get a direct source of EPA and DHA if they want it. Now, I don't think the research suggests that vegans need to supplement with DHA and EPA. I think it's fine to do that if you want to be sure, but I recommend that vegans make sure they're getting plenty of the short chain, which is also called ALA, alpha linolenic acid. These foods are the foods that are the highest in ALA. Walnuts is a particular easy one to come by and a tasty one. So I get most of my ALA through walnuts by just putting them on my oatmeal in the morning. And there's also flaxseed oil, but flax is very high in walnut, very high in ALA, and chia seeds, a number of other foods. Canola oil, if you use oil to prepare food, canola oil is high in ALA. Vitamin A is fairly easy to get in a vegan diet, but you have to, again, like the calcium and dark leafy greens, you have to make sure you're eating it. Carrot juice is extremely high in vitamin A, so just half a glass of carrot juice a day, or even a quarter cup of carrot juice is going to be enough. But these other foods are also excellent sources: butternut squash, sweet potatoes, pumpkin, carrots, and spinach, cantaloupe, and kale also have appreciable amounts of vitamin A. It's good to eat vitamin A throughout the day, and baby carrots are a perfect snack. They're low in calories and huge in vitamin A. Iron is an interesting nutrient in that it's plentiful in a vegan diet, but some people have trouble absorbing enough plant iron. Plant iron is hard harder to absorb than some of the iron in meat, which is called heme iron. I wouldn't worry about it unless you think your iron stores might be low, and that would be indicated by fatigue. If you do think you have low iron, you should probably get checked to see if that's true. A lot of times, well, I should just say that self-diagnosing iron deficiency is not a reliable way to diagnose it. And it's a very common test in a doctor's office. Iron is the most common nutrient deficiency in the United States, and it's not uncommon, so it's easy to get tested. Adding vitamin C at meals will significantly increase the amount of plant iron that's absorbed. The vitamin C combines with the iron to form a chelate that makes it more absorbable. Also, if you have problems with iron, avoiding tea and coffee at meals, and it's not the caffeine, it is the polyphenols, and those are found in most teas and as well as coffee, unfortunately. So if you have a problem, you should avoid the tea and coffee at meals. I would say give it an hour between or after meals so you can absorb iron if it's a problem. You can also increase legumes, which are high in iron, and dark leafy greens are high in iron, and avoid calcium supplements with meals, which also inhibits iron absorption. Here are some foods that are particularly high in vitamin C. Orange and grapefruit juice are the highest. Oranges are high. Broccoli is actually surprisingly high. Strawberries, grapefruit, and then yellow and red peppers. It's also found in these foods at the bottom: green kale, collard, Swiss chard, Brussels sprouts, green bell peppers, and cauliflower. However, do not think that just squirting a little bit of lemon juice on your food is going to be enough vitamin C to increase iron absorption. There's really not much vitamin C in a squirt of lemon juice. And I've heard people rely on that, so I like to point that out. You do need, you do need a decent serving of vitamin C if you want to see appreciable iron absorption. Now, again, you don't necessarily have to eat these foods unless you think, I mean, these foods are great to eat anyway, but you don't have to worry about it unless you have been diagnosed with iron deficiency or strongly suspect it. Zinc is something that is can be marginal for some vegans. Vegan diets provide about the DRI, but zinc is a little bit harder to absorb from plant foods, and the DRIs are not based, they are not assuming that all the zinc is coming from plant foods. They're assuming some is coming from animal foods. I would, like with iron, I wouldn't worry about zinc unless you find that you have symptoms of zinc deficiency, which would be poor wound healing, hair loss, impaired immune function, dermatitis, which is cracks around the edges of your mouth, and for kids, poor growth and delayed sexual maturation. That is a symptom of it. And good sources of zinc are legumes, nuts, seeds, oatmeal, bread, tempeh, and miso. And if necessary, you could take a supplement of about 10 milligrams for adults. Protein is something that a lot of people think you have to have meat or animal products for. I'm sure most of the people listening to this talk know that you don't. Protein is found in protein is found in all plant foods. All the amino acids are found in all plant foods. Some plant foods are higher than others. And there is one amino acid, lysine, that is considered the limiting amino acid in plant foods. In other words, it can be lower than the other amino acids. However, it is found there is plentiful amounts of lysine in these foods, which legumes is a big one, and legumes is quite common in vegan diets because it's in all sorts of beans, lentils, peas, which are both split or green. Soy foods have it, peanuts, seitan, quinoa is high in protein and high in lysine, pistachios, and pumpkin seeds. Now, if you don't eat any of these foods each day multiple times, you could be low in lysine. That's not going to happen to most people. You're just naturally going to eat these foods. So it's probably nothing to worry about. But if you do eat an extreme diet, such as a raw foods diet that focuses on low protein foods, you could end up with on the lower end of protein, and you could feel fatigued and weak. So it is hard to meet lysine requirements for a vegan who doesn't exercise daily without including foods, foods from the last slide. If you're a regular exerciser, your calorie requirements are going to be higher, and so you might just naturally eat more protein. Protein doesn't go up as much as just straight calories do when you exercise. So this could explain why some raw foodist people do seem to be fine. Athletes, I should say, do seem to be fine, whereas people who are not athletes on raw foods diet sometimes seem to need more protein. Now, this has not been diagnosed by a doctor. I'm going by anecdotal evidence from just talking to people. Okay, so as people age, they may need a higher percentage of protein. There is evidence that people over 60 do not metabolize protein as well as younger people. And so, and they also will sometimes start eating less, just they won't be as hungry. And so you need to make sure that a higher percentage of your food is high protein if you're a vegan. And if you're not eating enough calories to maintain your weight, if you are losing weight, maybe you want to be losing weight, you should make sure you're including more high protein foods also, because you'll be, generally you need to eat the amount that you need to maintain your weight in order to just naturally have enough protein in a vegan diet. It really depends on the type of protein diet you eat, but on average. So here's a rundown of my regimen that I don't even think about anymore until I run out of one of these and need to go buy some, but it's not terribly hard. For B12, I take 1/2 of a Trader Joe's B50 tablet. Iodine, I order potassium iodide once every few months off of Amazon. It's pretty inexpensive. I break a tablet in 1/3. Zinc, I take 1/4 of a 25 milligram tablet. I seem to tend to do much better on zinc. A lot of vegans, that will not be necessary. For calcium, I put fortified non-dairy milk on my cereal in the morning, and I try to eat dark leafy greens at night with dinner. Try and succeed most of the time. For iron, I eat an orange with breakfast. I don't necessarily think I need iron. I've been tested before and I've been fine, but I like to just throw an orange with the oats I eat in the morning. Vitamin D, I get a lot of sun. I try not to get too much, but I do get a lot in the summer and the warmer months. And then in the winter, try to take 1,000 IUs of vitamin D each day once the sun is no longer have the potential to burn me. Omega-3s, like I said, I eat walnuts on my cereal in the morning, and vitamin A, I eat plenty of baby carrots, as well as the dark leafy greens. Also, I wanted to mention the book Vegan for Life that I wrote with Jenny Messina. If you're interested in more details of the vegan diet, this covers basically everything that a layperson would want to know. So there's that option. And I think I'm ready for questions.
Great, thank you, Jack, for your presentation. We did get a lot of questions. We still have the Q&A tab open if anyone else would like to submit a question, but let's go ahead and get started. So the first question is by Isabella, and Isabella wants to know, can one healthily raise one's children vegan from birth? Assuming yes, there is anything that is especially important to take into account, ensuring they get plenty of certain nutrients like calcium, protein, etc. ?
Definitely. You can definitely raise kids from conception through adulthood. Many people have done it. You need to pay attention to basically the same things that I just listed. On veganhealth.org, we have more details about how to cover the needs of younger people and pregnant women and breastfeeding women. So you can get that information there, and we also have links to other resources. Yeah, so it's perfectly doable.
Thank you. And then I always struggle pronouncing this word, so forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, but this question is for the B12 supplements. Oh, sorry, the question just disappeared. There we go. For the B12 supplements, will the store-bought B12 indicate it's cyanocobalamin?
In most cases, it will in the ingredients. I have seen it sometimes listed only as cobalamin. And in that case, unless it's expensive, it's probably cyanocobalamin. Cyanocobalamin is pretty cheap. So if it's, I'd say $10 or less for a bottle, you're probably safe. If it gets up to 15 or higher, it might be methyl. But most of the time it will say it.
Thank you. Our next question, would edamame be the same as eating soybeans?
I think so. I mean, I'm not aware of anything in edamame that's different from just general soy across the board. So yeah, it's basically, it is soybean, so.
Okay. Sarah would like to know, for someone who is prone to kidney stones, do you have any specific recommendations on foods to avoid or increase consumption of, given the number of vegan staple foods that can contribute to kidney stones?
Yeah, so drinking a lot of water, as you probably already know if you've had kidney stones, is the biggest, seems to be what can really help the most. Avoiding the highest vegan foods in the oxalate, spinach being a one. Rhubarb is another one. I can't remember exactly. There's maybe about 10 foods that are really high in oxalate. We have a list of the foods on Vegan Health. We have an article on oxalate. It's been a few years since I wrote that article, so it's not coming back to me immediately what all the foods are to avoid. But the people that I've had experience with who've gotten a kidney stone on a vegan diet, I've never heard from anyone that got a second one after they just took basic common sense precautions of not eating a lot of spinach, drinking more water. So there's unfortunately not any research on vegans and kidney stones. And so it's hard to know exactly what you should tell someone, but that advice seems to work for people. Yeah.
Okay. Nancy would like to know if it's possible to have a vegan diet coupled with keto diet. So I think keto diet typically is perceived as a meat-heavy diet, right? But a vegan version of that.
It can be done. It's a little harder if you're a vegan than if you are a meat eater. There are a lot of resources online. Of course, you should be a little bit careful about what to follow, but there are vegan keto people who eat vegan keto. Yeah, so it's done. It's not something I know a whole lot about other than that they do it.
Sure. Jane would like to know if you can speak to different recommendations for people with osteoporosis. In my case, 60 plus years, female.
I mean, that's really something that you need to talk to your doctor about. Unfortunately, I can't really give medical advice on treating osteoporosis. Following the recommendations, you definitely should follow. Try to meet. I think the RDA for calcium is probably 1,200 for someone your age. So you should try to meet the RDA for calcium, and through vegan foods, fortified foods, or leafy greens. I mean, if you can meet it, well, you're not going to be able to meet all of it on leafy greens. You're going to meet a whole lot, but you can meet probably half of it on leafy greens, and that's got a lot of benefits for the bones in addition to just the calcium. So yeah, just follow the recommendations and then talk to your doctor about what they recommend for you as well.
Absolutely. This next question, you may have a great answer for this. Perhaps it's your book, but is there a book that lists which ingredients to buy when grocery shopping to get all the nutrients that you need when you go vegan 100% without getting any health issues?
Well, yeah, the book does have a eating plan in it, the Vegan for Life eating plan. It's also online on Jenny. Well, we link to it at the top of the daily needs page. It's not a shopping list, but it's a pattern of eating, and it lists the foods that you should eat and gives recommendations on servings. But you know what one person should buy and what another, what they're going to like. It's too variable from person to person, so we can't really say, well, this is what you should buy or not. But if you follow the general guidelines on that page and using the foods that you want to eat, you should be meeting. It's designed to meet all the nutrient recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Do you have time for a few more questions?
Oh yeah, as long as I have plenty of time.
Great. This next one's by Cheryl. Is it dangerous for a vegan's total cholesterol to go up to 180 or even higher if BMI is fine and triglycerides are low?
Again, that's something to talk to your doctor about. I don't consider a cholesterol level of 180 to be terribly concerning, but I do not want to give medical advice. I think you need to talk to your doctor and see if they think it's concerning or not. I know there is a theme in the vegan community that you need a cholesterol level of 150 or lower. That doesn't seem to be borne out in the large observational studies. You know, it can't hurt necessarily, but my cholesterol level is above 150 and I am not stressed out about it myself. So I am somewhat familiar with the research, so that maybe will give you some confidence. But again, talk to your doctor about what they think a healthy cholesterol level for you is. And it can be different from person to person.
Jack, David was wondering if there's any risk in eating too much or a lot of soy-based products.
Well, it would depend on what too much you mean by too much. Some people who have eaten dozens of servings a day have had weird issues. But people, generally the problems come from the isoflavones in the soy. And when people are given very large amounts of isoflavones through supplements, more than you could ever eat, there are generally no problems. So there have been these very rare cases where, for example, a man developed he developed breast tissue. They thought it was from soy, and he had been eating something like 12 glasses of soy milk a day, or there's two. There was someone else who got erectile dysfunction. They were both eating between 10 to 20 servings of soy a day. So we usually recommend that the research shows that 3 servings of soy is safe. Definitely, like we have a lot of evidence that that is safe, and that can even be healthy and prevent breast cancer in women. And so I usually think 5 servings should be safe also. But, you know, I would limit it, I would stay below 10 just because we don't know, you know, there's not research on people eating that much soy.
Okay. Katie would like to know if you have any recommendations for hair loss on a vegan diet. Katie says she takes a multivitamin with iron, but it doesn't seem to be helping.
Yeah, we have an article on hair loss on the on veganhealth.org, so you might want to check that out in case I don't remember all the details. Like I mentioned, the zinc supplement, you might need a bit more zinc. Lysine supplements have helped. So if I don't know what your diet is like, but if you do err on the low side of lysine, maybe increasing it. Sometimes there's hair loss with rapid weight loss. So I don't know in this individual's case if she's been losing weight. It's a good thing to talk to your doctor about to see if they have any thoughts on why you might be losing your hair. So those are some ideas, and I'd recommend reading the article and going from there. It's a short article.
Okay, and then we have one more here. It says, I've read it's better, and again, forgive me if I pronounce this incorrectly, but I've read it's better to take methylcobalamin sublingually for best B12 absorption. Is this true?
The research shows that chewing a vitamin B12 supplement is just as good as sublingual. For most people, I don't even think you need to chew it, but if you have a chewable one, then you might as well. Because it breaks it down, and then you are for sure going to be able to absorb it. But in most people's cases, they're going to whether they chew it or not. Regarding methylcobalamin, there is not evidence that that's a better form of B12. And I have a lot of information on vegan health regarding cyanocobalamin versus methylcobalamin if you're interested in looking at it. But the summary is that the whole kerfuffle about methylcobalamin is much ado about nothing. It is not something that you need to worry about. And sublingual is thought to be better, but the research just shows that chewing is just as good. So yeah.
Thank you, Jack. I just want to remind everyone who's still online that Jack is the Executive Director for Vegan Outreach. Please visit their website to see the kind of work that they are currently doing. Jack is also the co-author of the book Vegan for Life, Everything You Need to Know to Be Healthy on a Plant-Based Diet. And he also manages the website and blog veganhealth.org. All of these things will be included in the follow-up email after this event. Jack, do you have any final comments, or are there any other mediums people should visit to keep up to date with your work and your research and your studies?
Yeah, well, I want to mention the Vegan Outreach's 10 Weeks to Vegan program. We have that program for anyone who's interested in learning more about being vegan. And we have a companion Facebook group that goes with it. So if you want to interact with other people that are there to help you out, we also have a vegan mentor program where you can get one-on-one individual nutrition attention. There's also a dietitian in our Facebook groups who will answer nutrition questions. So check out veganoutreach.org and click on Try Vegan, and then that'll take you to a list of the 10 Weeks to Vegan series, and we have them from many countries. So please spread the word about that. And I think that's probably about it. That, and we do have a blog on Vegan for Life. You can get an email whenever we update the site with anything particularly important, so you can stay abreast of any vegan nutrition news that comes out that we feel like is important to share with the general public.
Sounds great. Thank you again so much for your time this evening. Thank you for everyone that attended our first lecture for our Fall 2020 series, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Thanks again, Robbie.